The first big concept with the container is that each box can be horizontal or vertical. By default, each container is in vertical mode, but you can always put it in horizontal mode if you want to, which then automatically aligns the items horizontally. And this is very different from what we were used to with sections and columns, where columns would always stack horizontally like this, and sections could only stack vertically like this. And then sometimes you even had to use intersections to create more depth in your design. But right now we don't have a difference anymore between sections and columns, we just have the container. And then you decide what the direction is with the new direction feature. So a lot of the times a design is a combination of boxes that are in vertical mode, like this one over here being in horizontal mode, because otherwise these items would be stacked on top of each other, this one, which is in vertical mode, and then the background container also being in vertical mode, because this container and this container are stacked vertically. You have two more options though, row reversed and column reversed, which I almost never use, because if you want to reverse things on mobile, I have better tricks for that. So until now, I've never used these other two. And the fact that we don't have to choose anymore between sections, intersections, and columns means that we also don't have the limits anymore, which the old system had. For example, going really deep. In the past, you could not put an intersection inside of an intersection if you wanted to go even deeper. With sections, columns, and intersections, we had the limitation that we could not go deeper than an intersection. So for example, if you wanted to have another intersection inside of here, you could simply not do that. It will put it beneath it or on top. But with the container, we don't have to choose. Everything is a container. So that means that you can keep adding containers inside of other containers until infinity. As you can see right here, you can go even deeper. So because of this reason, we can do much more detailed design than what we could do before with sections and columns, which is great. This also changes something in the relationship between widgets and containers. Because in the old system, widgets always had to be inside of a column. You could not have a widget directly inside of an intersection. As you can see right here, there was always a column and then the widgets. But with containers, this is a little different. It's still the case that widgets always have to be inside of a container, but if they are in the background container, then it's alright. This means that widgets can now live next to containers. Let me show you what I mean. So here we see an example. A super normal situation. We have a background container, we have this container with an image widget inside of it, and we have this container with some other widgets inside of it. But this widget is already inside of the background container, so it doesn't need this container. So let me show you what I mean. If you drag this widget outside of your container, which is by the way very hard to do because as you can see it's kind of buggy, so sometimes you will need the navigator right here to drag it outside of it and then delete this container. Now you will see that this widget is on the same hierarchical level as this container. The background container doesn't care what's inside of it. It basically sees this container also as one widget. So this whole container is now as important as this image to the background container, meaning that all of the settings will change both this container and this image widget. So now you understand why I didn't put this image inside of another container. I simply don't have to. This saves me one container and keeps the website a little bit faster. So if you do that throughout your website, then you will significantly improve the speed. So to round off this episode, remember that everything is a container. You don't have to worry about columns, sections, or anything. And you decide the direction. The container doesn't care if there's an image widget inside of it or a container. It will see it as equals, as we can see right here, even though this image is not in a container. And there's no limit for how deep we can go. Let's go to the next episode because we need to talk about alignment. Alright, welcome back to another episode about creating heights. I just wanted to tackle this real quick. This will be a short episode because I see a lot of people doing this wrong and it's not nice for yourself and not for your website. So let's say that you have a situation like this. You have added a few background containers where you didn't do anything in terms of height. You just added a few widgets, maybe something left, something right, something like this. And now you want to create some space in between. What do? What I see a lot of people do, which I do not want you to do, is add margin on the top and on the bottom. This looks like it works. So for example, let's put 80 on the top here and 80 on the bottom. Visually, this looks pretty good, right? Because it creates some space in between. But the space from this section to this section is kind of like nobody's land. Kind of like this picture. You cannot do anything in here anymore. You have no control over it. Because with margin, you just push the other item away. So nothing can be done with this space. So that's not really a good way to do it. And of course, the same applies on the top. From here to here is kind of like nobody's land. So you can't do anything with it. Well, actually, nobody's land is not a good metaphor, because in nobody's land, you can actually do something. Okay, but you get what I mean. You cannot do anything with it. What I also see people do, let me delete this margin for now, is that they go to layout over here and then they use the minimum height option. And this also visually seems to work great. But the problem with this is that if you want to add new content to the website, then the space will change. So for example, if I want to change this image to another image, a more vertical image like this girl, I will just pick it like that and I will maybe, I don't know, change the height a little bit to something like that, 500. And now you will see that the space over here, you know what, I will put it even higher, is gone. Because this container was set to 547 and this picture is already 550. So if you create some space, you want that space to adjust no matter how many new widgets you drag into the canvas, into the container. So minimum height is also not a good option. And the worst of the worst you can do is to use the spacer widget, which still too many people use. I've actually never used this widget. Very rarely I use the divider widget to create a line like this. You can see right here, divider, but this is not very good. Visually, it's super easy to use, right? You can just add a spacer over here. You can add a spacer over here and boom, you have some space. But this adds 2 extra widgets to your website. And if you do that everywhere, then it will dramatically slow down your website, which is not good, of course. You don't want that. I don't know why Elementor still has this, to be honest. I think it's like an amateur widget. So please do also not use the spacer widget. The thing that you should be using is padding. So if you click on your container, you go to advanced, and over here you can set padding, for example, 80 on the top and 80 on the bottom, and then it will create some space, but it will not create space outside of the container because this container still connects perfectly to that container. You see, there's no space in between. And even if you change the image over here to another height, let's say we're gonna pump it even up to even bigger, boom, you see the bottom and the top automatically adjust. Let me go back one step, boom. You see, it automatically adjusts no matter how many widgets you drag into it. Even if you drag a super big widget into it, like the Google Maps widget over here, we're gonna drag it in and see, it automatically adjusts. It keeps that 80 pixels that I've set up over here. In a future episode, I will explain why I don't use actually pixels for padding anymore, but I use rem and then I use a calculation, so it's automatically responsive. That's not for this episode. For this episode, you just remember that you use padding and don't use the other examples I just showed you. That's it for now. Short episode. Let's move on to the next one. Welcome back to another very interesting episode about wrapping. In the previous episodes, we have talked about alignment, aligning things to the grid, and making multiple row designs look good on desktop, tablet, and mobile. But right now I want to go a step further because the wrapping feature can be used to reduce containers. And the reason for that is because this container is still in horizontal mode, but with wrapping, we have actually achieved it to also create some vertical space. So this means that you can use wrapping not only to create horizontal layouts, but also vertical. Because for example, if I would take this widget and I would take it 100%, now we're working with vertical space, as you can see. So you can use this to reduce the amounts of containers because sometimes you don't need to use an extra container. Let's start with a really simple example, which is this one. So what is this? It's just a background, which is unboxed. It's very small, right? Because by default, it's very wide. So I just made sure that this was smaller, even 400. This whole container is in vertical mode because that's default. That's why this one, and this container is stacked vertically, but inside this container, things are horizontally, as you can see right here. But we can reduce this even more. So let's just try that. I'm gonna make a duplicate of this whole thing. So we have another version, and I'm gonna drag all of these items outside of it. So outside of this container. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now we have this situation. We don't need this container anymore. Let's delete it, and let's put this container on wrap. That doesn't work because we first need to put it in row. What is happening is that it's all trying to put everything in one row. But since this container, it has a small width, it doesn't have enough space, so the actual content box is just 400 pixels. So it's just literally this box. But if you would now delete this one, then you would see that this is what's actually going on. Why does this happen? So wrapping, again, will put items to the next row when they don't fit on one row. So when they don't fit in the 100%. This item plus this item is already more than 100% in terms of pixels. That's why these are on a separate row. But next to this item, there's still space for some items. Not for 4, but for 3. Therefore, this one is on the next row. But if you would delete one of these texts, then you would see that everything will fit on one row. Well, almost. Almost. And yes, now it all fits on one row. But by default, the items will become small. So if you go to advanced and then put this one on 100% of the width, now, even though this text is not enough, this widget is 100% of the width, not the content, but the widget, therefore putting this one on the next row. Let's also do that for that one. Let's put it on 100% and boom. And now you just have to take this one and put all of the items in the middle. And here you have it. It's still not the same because there's a lot more text here. So let's just try that and see if this is enough what we're trying to do here, because I'm cheating a little bit. Okay, so this is not what I want, right? So how can we solve this? Well, in this case, we can just put this container at 400 pixels box and then that issue is solved. It depends on the situation because sometimes you just don't have the space to do that. Let's take a look at another example. So we have this situation over here. So let's say that we want to get to a layout. Let me delete the padding real quick. We want to get to a layout where these two text layers are like half the width. So what we actually want, if we want to have this item, we don't want it to be this wide because that's not really nice for the reading experience. We want it to be like small, like this one, right? And the heading as well, we want to break that to 2 rows. So let's just also do that. Let's also make it a bit smaller like this. Now, if we put this background container on row and then on wrap and then on left, now you will see that this item is next to this item because these two items, 25% plus 40% is not enough to create 100% of the width. So therefore, this one will not wrap. And we could go even a step further because this container also contains 3 boxes. But with wrap, we don't need that container. So let's all drag them outside of it. And let's try to use as little containers as possible. So I've dragged all of them outside of it. Now I'm going to delete that one. I'm going to give these ones a smaller width. So how much do we need? We want 3 columns here. So we're going to go up to our things that we've learned in the past episode. 25% plus grow. So let's do that. Make sure it's on full width, 25% plus grow. I'm going to copy that style and paste it to the other two. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now we have the problem that this one is even on the first row because there was still enough space. Because 25% of this one, 40 plus 25 is still not 100, including the gap. So now we need to use some tricks. So the obvious thing to do is just to put this one at 100% and this one as well. But then the text doesn't break how you want it. You can cheat and add like a little HTML code in here, like a brr, like that. Oh, that doesn't work right now because we need to go to the text one over here. This is a little trick that you can use in order to add breaks. But this is not best practice because then maybe on mobile mode it breaks in a place where you don't want it to break. So I do not recommend to cheat like that. So in this situation, you can do two things. First, you can just keep this one at, for example, 40% and then add a divider widget after this, which is 100%. It's black as you can see right now, so let's give it another color so we can see it. And then you can put the gap at 0, and then you can put this one at 0%, but then you have to mess with padding, etc. It's not perfect. It works because this one is 100% of the width, so therefore it creates a break, but it's not perfect because you're adding an extra widget. So if you really care about not using too much containers, you can just put this one at 100% of the width and then play with padding. So if you go to percentages and you add a little bit of right padding, then it creates padding on the inside, but the widget will still stay 100%. You see, this is a pretty cool hack. So we can also do that for the header. So if you go over there, we put it on 50 or I don't know, even 70, however you want to break the text. We can do it like that. So then we don't need any widget and we're still breaking the text. And we have reduced this design with two containers because there's no container around these three widgets anymore. And there's no container around these three widgets anymore. Like I said, it's a little bit more hardcore, but I did reduce this section with two containers. So here's another example which we just created in the past episode, and I've also used a container over here. But maybe we can do the same trick, right? Because here is also a container around all of these widgets. So let's try to get rid of this container and this container and see if we can still make it happen. So I'm gonna drag them outside of it. Let's try to make that happen. It's always very hard to do it like this, so I'm just gonna use the navigator on the right here in order to reduce the containers. I'm gonna drag all of the icon boxes outside. Okay, we need to set up something, so let's just delete this container and also this container at the bottom. And let's try to put this whole background container on wrap. So we first put it in a row and then we make it wrap. And now we can see that this is already pretty close to what we're trying to achieve because we already used the percentages plus grow. The gap is still too big, but that is because I changed the gap. So if we put that back at 20, now we can see that this layout still works. Why is that? Well, because this one is still 41%. This one is still 50% plus grow, which makes a total of 40 plus 41%, which is 9% left, which is not enough for this container to stay also on this row, because this one is 25, so then it would be more than 100. So now you can see we have reduced this whole section with two containers. Let's go up. Another example over here. You would assume that there is also a container around these two boxes, right? But there is no container, as you can see. There's only a container here because I have three widgets in a row here. But I don't need a container around this because this whole container is also on horizontal and wrap. And therefore, all of the settings, for example, the space between, works on everything. So here I've also reduced this section with three containers because otherwise I would use a container over here, and over here. Let me go to another more extreme example. Here you can see a design where I've used the maximum amount of containers. I've just been lazy. I've even added a container around this image, added a container around here. This one doesn't have a container, but then here's a container, and here, so that I could put this container just on vertical and middle align so that these would all stack. And then within here, I also added two containers because I have an icon over here and two text layers over here. So here we already have 6 containers. Here's 7, here's 8, and here is 9. And now scroll up and let's see where I have actually used this trick. So here we have made this whole same design with just 2 containers. There's no container around the image. There's just a background container and 1 container over here, because here I've put this one in row, a wrap, and I've really paid attention to how wide the elements are. I've added some width over here. As you can see, I've used 90 on this widget and 10 on this widget without using a gap. That's why 10 and 90 fit on one row. And then I just added a little bit of space over here. And then I just aligned this icon to the left because it's not super big. And therefore, I have reduced this whole section with 7 containers. So don't be lazy and use some time to practice what I just showed you in this tutorial so that you can drastically decrease the amount of containers you use on your website. If you don't really care about page speed yet, then you don't have to do this, but I know many of you guys do. So I hope that this inspired you to use less containers in your websites. Alright, let's now move on to the next episode.